let's move ahead with the economics of the pandemic. Ike Chioke is joining me right now from Lagos. Ike Chioke is the Group Managing Director of Afrinvest West Africa. Welcome to the program. Great to speak to you again after a very long time. Should I say
good morning, Nancy?
Should I say thank goodness for the lockdown? For chief executives like you now, no excuse anymore. No
I can't,
meetings apart
I
from
can't, I
remote.
can't say I'm traveling on business. I'm stuck
Yes,
at home.
you're stuck at home, but working at home definitely. So,
Thank you.
so welcome to the program. Let's get started. The economics of the pandemic. Let me have your own view about how we've been doing so far in terms of weathering the storm. Have we even started weathering the storm economically, or we are just saddled with the human crisis, which definitely is the first, because health is wealth. Health is number one. What are your sentiments concerning weathering this storm at this time?
Well, Nancy, I think we've been hit by what I consider a perfect storm, a combination of three different events happening at the same time, which will cause massive damage to the economy down the road. We are, in my view, still at the very onset of the crisis. And the first one, obviously, is the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, and the consequential shutting down of the global supply chain system. For now in Nigeria, we're still dealing with just little clusters of the pandemic, nothing on the scale of what we're seeing in Italy or in North America. And so it's little contained clusters. But what is clear is that obviously with many countries shutting down their borders, you've seen now a complete a shrinkage of demand. Obviously, you've seen the impact on the oil prices. Good thing that the Russians and the Saudis are trying to mend fences, and it's come back up to $29. But the first effect, as I explained, is the global supply chain system, which is going to hit Nigeria. The second effect is the pandemic itself. And now there are two potential scenarios. One is if it continues like it is today in Nigeria, which is small clusters, and we have an ongoing rolling series of shutdowns, of lockdowns, excuse me. So small clusters that can be contained with our medical infrastructure as it is. Now, if we are not lucky and it becomes sort of a full-blown sort of epidemic within Nigeria, similar to what you see in Italy, then you can imagine that our very rudimentary healthcare system and infrastructure will be overwhelmed, and that will have severe consequences for the country. Now, already, when you have a lockdown and shut down cities like Abuja and Lagos, there's going to be a massive impact on the movement of money and the consumer capacity and all those effects. And that effect is somewhat delayed, and we'll start feeling the effect of the shutdown of Lagos and Abuja probably in 2 to 4 weeks. There are no people traveling, the hotels are empty, there are no events going on, and all these have an impact on everybody that depends on services for existence. Then the last effect is really how we manage ourselves out of the crisis. I suspect that this is not going to be a 1 to 2 month fix. It is likely to drag on at best for easily 6 months. It could be, if it's short, it's 3 to 6 months, but I project something like 6 to 12 months. And then how do we then make sure that the backbone of the economy, which is, if we are focusing on healthcare, which is important, what about food? We need to make sure that the food supply system is secured. And what about essential services like electricity and water, and then getting back the rest of the economy? So there are multiple dimensions of this problem that it requires bold and creative steps in order to resolve. It's not something that, in my view, I feel that we have actually begun to tackle quite as robustly as we should, given all the resources and capacities within Nigeria. I saw Dr. Herbert Migwe speaking earlier, and it's absolutely fantastic that the private sector has donated the amount of money that they've put together. But it's not just money alone. I think that there needs to be some degree of creativity in how we solve this problem. There's a saying that goes like, you should never waste a crisis. And I think a crisis like the COVID pandemic is an opportunity for Nigeria to reset the economy and the way the country runs. In order to actually track the pandemic, I think that we ought to build something like a digital platform for people to record if they are having COVID symptoms, a digital platform for people to record what has been delivered in terms of isolation centers and hospital equipment, and then use that to build a proper healthcare infrastructure that is permanent so that we'll never see this kind of problem recurring again. So there are certain kind of things that need to be, that I haven't yet heard from the, sort of the leaders of the leadership of the country that we could introduce in terms of solving it.
I like the dimension you're coming from, and it was also part of what I discussed yesterday a bit with Herbert Nwigwe in terms of, it's okay, money, we do need money at this time too, but there are also other structures which we need to put together. Also on the program yesterday, I discussed food security in Nigeria, which no one is thinking of, though the president approved the release of 70,000 metric tons of grains from the strategic reserves to give to the poor and the vulnerable. How much will that take? How many people will that get to? Then, are we also planning on replenishing? Our farming season should start this month. So there are a lot of dimensions, yes, to it. So it's a matter of trying to solve the pandemic, trying to also make sure that the spread is not that much, but also taking by the corner the economic consequences that will result from this. So that brings me to the next question, which is, how bad will the Nigerian economy be before it becomes worse than better? I hope you understand what I'm saying. It's already bad, but how bad will the Nigerian economy be before it becomes worse? Then we talk of better if the policies and if the structures are put in place.
Well, if you recall the recession we experienced in 2016, GDP growth fell down to minus 1.6. Already, I've seen a report by McKinsey which suggests that in the best possible outcomes, Nigeria's GDP might be something closer to minus 3.4 in the best possible outcomes.
That's deeper.
You can see that, yes, that it will be twice as bad as what we experienced in 2016. And that is assuming that the coronavirus itself is contained in Nigeria and that it doesn't spread out in the kind of way that we see in Italy or the United States. Now, imagine if it became more widespread, given the sort of clusters, the way we live in very close communities, particularly at the lower income levels. Then we could see a shrinkage of the economy that is approaching sort of high single digits, like 7 or 8%. But they just put that in real terms, in terms of dollars and cents. If we were to shrink the economy by up to minus 2.5 or minus 3%, you're taking out something like $20 billion from the economy this year. And that is the sort of the best of a bad situation, the best worst case situation that you will see. That the budget for 2020, when it was set, was a $33 billion budget. Now, it was then modified, by the Honorable Minister about 2 weeks ago when she said that we are now assuming a budget benchmark of $30. And then recently, I think yesterday, she said they are reviewing that budget benchmark because they don't think even $30 is realistic. At present, we have many cargoes floating in the high seas that have not found homes. And bear in mind that the price at $29 that you see is just the trading price. It doesn't mean that's the delivery price. Some people are giving deep discounts. So Nigeria, with a cost of production of around $15, $17, you can see we won't compete with the Saudis who are discounting as low as $5 or $7 per barrel.
Yeah.
So there are severe issues. So if the budget is going to be cut by the degree of that $20 billion, then you clearly see that when you look at the budget components alone, we have a debt service which has to be paid of about 2.5 trillion naira. That has come from trying to spend ourselves out of the last recession. If you recall, the former Minister of Finance, said the best approach is to spend ourselves out of the recession. And we started doing that. But I think, in hindsight, clearly some of us were arguing that perhaps spending money that aggressively is not the best way when there are opportunities for cost cutting. for cost-cutting measures to save. The challenge we now have is that we may not have the capacity to spend that money because we don't have it down. We had also predicated that this year we're going to go to the Eurobond market, but the spreads in the Eurobond market for Nigeria have widened significantly. If you look at the coupon at which some of the series of bonds that Nigeria has trading in the market were issued at over the last 5 or 6 years, the average coupon is between sort of 5 to 8%. But currently, Nigerian bonds are trading as high on a yield basis, as high between sort of 11 and 13%. That means if Nigeria were to try and issue new bonds in this market, we'll be paying over twice as much as we paid several years ago. And that's assuming you find people willing to give us money, because already we've been downgraded by the rating agencies. I think because Standard & Poor's took us down a notch from double B to single B. And so that even puts more pressure on our capacity to raise money. So when you then look at the budget component and see that there are certain things we have to pay. If you're owing money, you have to pay your debt service. Otherwise, if you default, it makes situations even worse. Then what that means is that we really need to come back and look at what component of recurrent expenditures that can be cut. And this is a good time to start thinking about that. Our firm, Afrinvest, has been advocating for a leaner government for many years, and we've sounded like a broken record for years. Now the truth is now coming to haunt us. We need to look at how we make government leaner and more efficient. That is why I keep advocating that this crisis presents a unique opportunity for Nigeria to transition to a digital kind of government, and in fact bring down all the costs. If you're in a lockdown situation, you now realize you don't actually need 6 official cars outside your house, because you're not going anywhere. And we may not be going anywhere for a long time. So we need to use those savings and use it to tackle the key areas of the economy that can get us out of this. The healthcare is an important one, education for sure. And then, of course, importantly, is food security, and rebuild a new Nigeria out of the crisis. If we don't start thinking as radically as that, I'm afraid we'll have what I consider a drip approach to fixing the problem, which may not achieve any material effect, and then it will then prolong the suffering and the situation for years to come.
Okay, if you take a look at just what you said now, a radical thinking, do you see this administration having the best plan to revive the economy, even as we battle the pandemic? Because the president has put together an economic sustainability committee. Since this crisis started, in fact, on this program, I've been talking about it because I've been following the COVID watch even before I came into Nigeria. And I've been saying, even at that time, I was saying, we need like a crisis war. We need people to come together and begin to put measures in place and strategies. What if this gets here? It has gotten here now. Even as of last week, I was still talking about it. But I'm glad that the Economic Sustainability Committee has been set up by the president. But even as that is being done, there's also an Economic Advisory Council. What roles should the two be playing? Because there seems to be confusion now. Then the other part, the vice president did say yesterday, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, that no government in the history of Nigeria has ever faced this kind of crisis. There's a need to redesign economic planning. I'm sympathetic to this government also in the area of, if care is not taken, the country will suffer 2 recessions in 4 years. And that will be very, that will not really be a good one. So with this administration now, with all what we're seeing, though not holistic, do you see it as the best plan to lift the country out of the doldrums?
I think certainly the capacity to come up with an appropriate plan exists within Nigeria today. I think that the government is saying all the right things, but we have lived with them for 5 years, and we've seen that they do manage to say the right things, but it often fails when it comes to execution. I think that what the vice president said yesterday about using this opportunity to rebuild Nigeria is kind of leaning towards where I think they ought to be going. Take, for instance, I was watching on the news last night about, cash being paid out to people at the lower income, something like 20,000 naira, which the president authorized. and it's been done in cash. You know, it's all well intended, but I think if you think of the mobile phone networks we have, about 186 million lines and about 126 million data users, there are probably far more efficient ways of delivering cash to each person and confirming that they have received it than to, bring it out in lumps of cash. This in flagrant disregard of the CBN's cashless policy.
Policy.
You know,
Thank you.
you
Yes.
know. So when I want to think about delivery mechanisms, you then realize the problem isn't just quite economic, or neither is it just quite healthcare. It needs a multi-dimensional approach where you bring in all the experts we have. And I'm saying that you need the telecommunications people, you need skills in information technology and programming, because I would think, for instance, by now the NCDC would have had a digital platform that will allow someone to report if they're having a COVID-19 symptom. Because if there was an app, I could just say, look, I think I may be having a problem, and the app will just upload on their system, and they can see, and they kind of advise me. For now, it's still a manual based, so you call a phone number, stay in your home, we'll come and attend to you. But you need a digital map of these problems. And in terms of the economy, you then think of, while I'm trying to secure the economy, and there are serious issues, because if you started a budget benchmark of 57, it went to 30, and now you're considering going to 25, at a point you have gone below even your own operating expenses. So you have to think, what can I do in terms of operating expenses? What can I do in terms of raising money? I may not be able to raise money from the Eurobond market, but if I'm going to raise money from the multilateral agencies, they're going to ask me to show evidence of cost cutting and reform. And those reforms we talked about for years need to come on the table, but it may not be reformed in an analog way. You have to do it in a way that it connects back to the society. But one critical element of this is that I think over the years, the nature of the politics we played in Nigeria has created a massive trust deficit between the government and the governed, because often you see something that is in stark, plain black and white, and somebody comes to tell you that it is red, and because they're in power, you just have to go with their way. And there are so many people that say, oh, no, you must go, it's my way or the highway. But COVID-19 doesn't operate in such a manner. If we don't take care, it would infect anybody, whether you're a rich man or a poor man. And then those has consequential effects of disrupting lives and disrupting livelihoods. So we must create a transparent framework and be able to get sort of someone that has the character and capacity to speak to Nigerians and get us organized together, because you need a large volunteer force to actually begin to solve this problem. You need to be able to mobilize hundreds of thousands of people to help government, but they need to also believe that in whatever they're doing, there is trust and agreement that they'll be treated right, whatever you agree to do for them, while then putting the palliatives in place, while also thinking of the economic plans, while also thinking about the health plans. And this system is what we need to kind of start thinking about. It's not simply just focusing on the economics or the health angle, but from where I stand, I do think that we're at the very beginning of the recession. The recession is certainly going to happen because the world economy is in a recession. I can't see how Nigeria will escape it. By the time the Western industrialized economies have found a way to contain and control COVID-19, if we're lucky to be in the same boat, then we can see ourselves coming out of that. And that could suggest that by the second half of the year, things might start looking better. But if COVID-19 and it becomes a massive health issue for countries like Nigeria, given our crowded situation, then we may then end up becoming a pariah country. If you recall, when Ebola was prevalent, because it was an Africa problem, the rest of the world quickly closed their borders to all the key areas. So imagine if they then solve the COVID-19 problem in Western Europe and North America and Asia, but it's still raging all over Africa. Then what will happen is that we're stuck here. They don't want to come over because they don't want to get infected, and we can't get the sort of the connectivities that we had taken for granted over many years until we resolve the situation. So that's why I think that there shouldn't be any politics in this game. This time around, everybody needs to be very honest and transparent in trying to focus and solve this problem quickly.
You're really hitting the nail on the head. Different dimensions which the government should take note of. Like I said earlier, many strategies, because what you've just said now is also one of my fears and one of my concerns, in the sense that what if the Western economies or the Western world are able to put themselves together in Africa or in Nigeria as the biggest black nation on earth, we are not able to fix it, and we still have COVID-19 as an epidemic within us, they will close their borders against us. That means nothing would happen, businesses will not come in, foreign capitals will not come in, even the so-called big men will not be allowed to go into those countries anymore. So we are faced with this place. So fix your country. Like Dr. Nwigwe told me on the show yesterday, it's about Nigeria first, and this thing is beginning to tell us that we need to build local capacity. Let's come back a bit to what you actually said earlier, which is also very instructive. And I mentioned it, okay, I mentioned it to someone I was speaking with. You clearly told us here, federal government is giving palliatives, 20,000 naira, a backlog of 5,000 over the last 4 months to the poor and vulnerable people. And they're doing that by handing out cash. And this is a government that there's a cashless policy in place, that is a financial inclusion strategy. So it's no one thinking that many of these poor people and vulnerable do not really have bank accounts. And the banking system has been simplified to an extent that you can even open an account on your phone.
Absolutely.
And most of these people who have phone. So why aren't we seeing the government also direct that policy towards that, so that you can also increase the number of financially included people, as well as promoting the financial inclusion strategy. So it's like government is saying this one, they are doing the other. Or perhaps it's no one thinking along that line, so no one is saying that.
Well, the way I look at it, the first point is really the cost of delivery. You know, if I want to do something, I want to say, how can I do it with the most efficient way possible? You know, if I want to give 20,000 naira to 2.6 million Nigerians, and I'm going to organize, you know, bullion vans to take cash around all the villages and nooks and crannies of Nigeria, then that can be quite challenging. But if I work with the telecom operators and the commercial banks who have, you know, I think there are 40 million BVNs registered. Like I explained earlier, there are about 126 million Nigerians that have phones that have data on it. You probably can map out and show that easily half of the people you're trying to reach can be located either through a bank account or through a phone line. And so sitting from the central bank, you should be able to verify and drop 5,000 naira to each account, or change it in a manner that you go to MTN or Airtel or Nine Mobile and say, look, we want you to give a credit to this phone number and let the person take that number and go and collect it as cash in the bank. And that is doable with the technology that we have today. Now, obviously, if I decided that I'm going to actually do it by manual labor and getting people to move to each village, then as an engineer, I used to be an engineer once upon a time, I wonder how many days and weeks it would take to get done. And if someone tells me they did it within a week, you know, it just beggars belief in this era of lockdown that you're able to do such a thing so quickly. It tells me that perhaps there may be leakage in the system and that the money that has been budgeted and spent, but we may not see the full effect of it because there's no way to account it. So there are ways to track these kind of things, and that's really what I'm trying to get to. You know, you must think of the lowest cost. At this point in time, we don't have the money. We already know we're going to be in trouble. So we need to be creative in finding cheaper and cheaper ways and more efficient ways to do the old things that we used to do.
Now, let's take a look at the model that will work better at this time in terms of reviving the economy. We've seen the Central Bank of Nigeria, at least in the last 2 to 3 weeks, come up with different interventions. In fact, the CBN was at the forefront of coming up with interventions for healthcare sector, doing a consultative roundtable, bringing all the big titans together to help Nigeria out of this economic mess that we may go into. Which model do you think will work better? Looking at the two models, the US model against the EU model, the US model is giving cash cash handouts to its citizens, about 1,200 or 1,300 US dollars to an American citizen. The EU model is, we're going to help businesses, we're going to give you loans, we're going to do all of that. So which do you think will work better in our society, giving cash handouts? I'm not only talking about the FG palliatives, but what model will work to revive businesses so that even if there's going to be a recession, it wouldn't be too deep, that businesses will not really lay off many workers and all of that?
I think that we need to come with a homegrown solution. For far too long, we often look outside Nigeria and say, oh, because they're doing this in the US, let's just do the same thing. We don't have the sort of data transparency that the United States have to be able to reach any individual in their state or in their village and say, we're going to transfer this amount of cash to you. Similarly, in the UK, in Europe, where they have a proper record of small and medium-sized enterprises. In Nigeria, our SMEs are very vulnerable businesses. You know, my barber that comes to cut my hair once in a while here is an SME. It's a one-man business, but on an average weekend, he could go around Ikoyi and, you know, have about 10 or 20 clients and make easily 50,000 naira. Now, if there's a lockdown, how does he do that? And in that scenario, how does the government even know that he has a small business? Because it's not registered. You know, so we have, and this is just one example, and it stretches all the way to people that you might meet at an event that, you know, will help you park your car and, you know, collect something on the side. And there are millions of us. So that's why I think that we need to have a homegrown solution that is looking more at the kind of country that we are, the situation in terms of the level of poverty. Remember, before COVID-19, we have 100 million very poor Nigerians that are living below $2 a day. It's probably going to fall down today, given how the exchange rate is moving. Yeah? So we have that issue on one hand. Then you also then have the issue of how distorted the information is. I think that what is required is for us to come with a homegrown solution for Nigeria. And it's all based on trying to connect the society through groups, trying to have leadership from the government, and trying to build a digital platform to help govern that structure going forward.
Now, since we're talking about businesses and you sit on top of one of the biggest investment firms, what kind of, what management decisions and boardroom decisions would we see in the coming weeks? What management thought process are you all coming up with at this time to help avert a crisis? Because we're seeing now that COVID-19 is a health crisis, a humanitarian crisis. Over 50,000 people have died globally, 1 million cases confirmed. We've seen boardroom decisions, management decisions, even though there's a lockdown, but remotely decisions being taken. What thought processes are going on right now to help lift businesses so that people like you don't even lay off workers, perhaps after the lockdown or in months to come?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, we actually had a management meeting this morning I had with my top executives to think about how we deal with the COVID situation. And we already began to sort of look at scenarios on how long the situation will continue. We're not putting anything, we're not making anything sacrosanct. But what we've done is that in this period of lockdown where we're working from home, we're now looking at how efficient we can use we can operate our offices. Because, you know, luckily for Afrinvest, we are
Okay,